this week, because things are starting to ramp up, I'm sure, with classes, I wanted to give you some tips about how you can effectively incorporate different kinds of studying mechanisms into your study routine. So one that I wanted to discuss is flashcards, and they can be a really great tool for studying. And I'll also talk briefly about an application that we can use that's like an online app as opposed to physical flashcards. But I was hoping to be able to show my screen so that we could kind of go through that process of creating some online flashcards together. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to figure that out. And also it wouldn't work for the Instagram viewers either. So I thought it would be better if we just kind of stuck to the hard copies of flashcards. But at the same time, the same kind of tenets will apply to both types of flashcards. So I thought that it would be great to discuss how to kind of incorporate flashcards into your study routine. So I think I will jump into the content. There may be some other folks joining us later, but so I can't believe it. It is actually episode 16 of the Homework Help Show. It is so hard to believe. Just going to make sure my phone's plugged in. Yeah. And way back in episode 8, we talked about some techniques about how you can study effectively and retain the information you studied. So I'm sure that things are starting to heat up with classes and tests and exams, probably midterms at this point. And you're probably looking for some techniques to be able to incorporate into your study routines. So as I mentioned, I thought that talking about flashcards would be kind of an appropriate thing to address at this point. So you might remember back in episode 8, if you're an avid viewer, I discussed an application called Anki. It's Anki, which can be used to design and implement your own digital flashcards. And that's a really great website to visit if you're interested in kind of going that route with designing your flashcards. But I am going to, as I mentioned, discuss how to make your own flashcards using physical pieces of paper or flashcards that you can get, at the dollar store, something like that. So flashcards are a study mechanism that has been tried and true, but of course there are other ways to study, and flashcards are only one kind of tool I would suggest that you can put in your toolbox. Hi Justine, we're talking about how to use flashcards in your study routine. So if you're interested in sticking around and joining us, that would be awesome. Are you a student? Oh, maybe she dropped off. So flashcards are a really great kind of tool to have in your toolbox, and of course you can use it alongside of other study mechanisms as well. So I kind of wanted to go over how to create really great flashcards and kind of the things to avoid when you are making flashcards. So basically the reason flashcards work is that they promote something called active recall. This means that it helps you to exercise the muscle which allows you to actively retrieve information from the brain, which is one of the most effective ways of studying, because it's helping you to exercise that muscle of retrieving information. And when you do that over and over and over again, it actually strengthens that muscle. So that's why flashcards are a really, really great tool to implement into your study routines. They do take a little bit of time to create, but I would highly recommend implementing them because there's a whole process to it and it can really enhance your studying. So as I often do, I'm going to draw off some content that was produced by Thomas Frank, who is an awesome YouTuber. I've referenced him before. He creates awesome content, and I would recommend anyone who is a student or who is interested in kind of overall productivity to check his channel out, because it is really great. He's got a lot of really great content there. So I've actually gone ahead and made my own flashcards for the purposes of this episode. Oh, hi, the neighborly consultant. Nice to see you. You missed my showing of my cats earlier to Coach Core. So this week we're talking about flashcards and how to implement them into your study routine. And this can be for anyone. It doesn't just have to be for students. I'm not a student right now, but I'll talk to you about what kind of I want to do with my flashcards. And they can be, we're always students, you know, like we're always learning things and, you know, trying to improve ourselves. So using flashcards can be used even if you're not a university or college student. Oh, maybe I'll give you a glance at them later once we get through a little bit more of the content. Yeah, they're pretty warm and snuggly here in the apartment. So, as I was saying, I have actually gone ahead and created some of my own flashcards, so that I can show you how to make really good flashcards and not so great flashcards. Okay. So, as I was saying, you don't necessarily have to be a student to use flashcards. So for example, I hope to someday become a yoga teacher. So for the purposes of this, and because I want to start studying about yoga, I've created a few flashcards to get myself started and to give you guys an example. But yeah, so you can use it for anything you're studying. If you want to learn a new language, if you want to, like Thomas Frank, when I looked at his YouTube, he was looking at studying the periodic table just because that was something that he had never studied before. So he wanted to learn that. So yeah, I think that they can really be used for anything. Oh, thank you, Coach Core. That's so nice of you to say. I think I have a lot to learn before I get there, and I have to definitely start cultivating more of a daily yoga practice, but I'm getting there, and I'm working on mindfulness as well, so I think they all kind of go hand in hand. So hopefully I'll start studying and see where it goes. It's really kind of you to say, though. Oh, I'm just realizing what's going on with Facebook. I think it's actually using the computer camera, but I guess we're just going to have to roll with it for now. Okay. So, let's jump into the content. So, the first tip that I wanted to give you when you're thinking about using flashcards is that make your own cards. So it might be tempting to use someone else's cards because, as I said, they can be a little bit time consuming to make. And if you're super busy and you're a student, you might not want to take that extra chunk of time that it takes to create your own flashcards. But it's really important for you to make your own flashcards because, one, you are going to retain more information if you make them. Because one of the most important tenets of intaking information is actually learning the information and working with it in your brain, and that helps you to retain the information. So even though you might save some time using someone else's flashcards, they won't be as effective for you if you do, because you won't be as familiar with the content that you're creating, if that makes sense. So it's of more benefit to you if you are going to implement flashcards into your routine for you to take the time out to create your flashcards. And it will also help create new neural pathways in your brain, which will be different from someone else's pathways. So when you are intaking and learning the information, the pathways that you form in your brain related to a certain topic are going to be different from another person, because all of our brains are different. So it's really important to set aside some time, if this is something you're going to implement into your study routine, for you to create your own flashcards. And it doesn't have to take that long, but it would take a little bit of time depending on what subject you're studying. So the second tip in creating your own cards is to add pictures with them and mix them up with words. So this is actually based on science, that people tend to remember images and pictures more than they remember words, just because we are kind of visual people. Images make more sense to us than words, because words are really just a string of symbols set up to represent something, whereas images actually mean something to us. And so do words, but they mean something in a different way. So two ideas of what you could do with your flashcards is that you can either print out pictures from the internet, which is a really great idea, and just cut them out and paste them onto your flashcards. Or you can draw if you have confidence in your drawing skills, or even if you don't, as you will see with my flashcards, you can still draw because they will make sense to you and you will know what the pictures are, unless you are really, really bad at drawing, which it could be argued that I am, judging from these flashcards, but maybe when I make them for real for studying for yoga, then I will try to do a bit better drawing. But just in terms of your own use, don't worry about your drawing skills. As long as they mean something to you, then it's not a big deal. And then the best way to do this is to incorporate pictures with words. Coach Core, that's a really good question, and I'll actually, so the question is, just for the recording, is Coach Core is asking, should they be in point form? And how I would answer that is that whatever works for you. If you want them to be in point form, that's fine. But I will discuss, so when you're creating a flashcard, you're only going to want one piece of information to be on the flashcard, so you don't necessarily have to do them in point form, because it's only going to be one piece of information. And the best way to do it is actually to incorporate images as well as words. And I will definitely talk about that just a little bit more as we go on here. But yeah, you'll see mine are definitely not in point form, but if point form works for you, then go for it. But whereas you're only including one piece of information, you don't need point form. So another kind of tip is that in addition to the words and the pictures, you can add a descriptive phrase or sentence beside it, and that will also help you with recall. The third tip is to use mnemonic devices on your cards. So mnemonic devices are ways that you can remember information. So you can recall it. It implants in your brain more readily when you use mnemonic devices. Basically, they're a way for your brain to remember very specific information. So for example, I remember when I was in biology class, my biology professor was really interested in the brain, and he had us use a series of mnemonic devices to remember all of the prime ministers of Canada. So for example, we went from one until, I think who was in at the time, must have been Harper. We went from the very first prime minister all the way up until Harper, and he had us memorize each one in relation to a mnemonic device. And it was actually really effective. I can still recall some of those prime ministers to this day. John A. Macdonald is, of course, the first. Now I'm putting myself on the spot. The second is King, I believe. Anyway, so I can't remember them off the spot, but we had to associate certain words with the names of the prime ministers. So that's an example of mnemonic device. And I can also show you on my cards, I've incorporated that as well, because it gives you a picture between the image and the information that you're trying to recall. So instead of just trying to recall the specific information, you have a silly little thing to remember it with. Another example of this is the Roy G. Biv acronym. So to remember the colors in the rainbow, Roy G. Biv is a really common mnemonic device. So basically, the weirder you make your mnemonic devices, the more apt you are to remember the information. And I'm just going to take, just pause there for a minute. Hi, Ali. Thank you for joining us. We're just talking about how to use flashcards in your studying. Yeah, it did freeze. Is it back on now? It said poor connectivity for some reason. I'm not sure why. Instagram. Oh, I know, right? I've seen, like, sometimes when people do live streams, it does this. Like, it'll freeze or it'll even stop working sometimes, so. So I'm going to show you my cards. And first I'm going to show you an example of a not so good... freezing again. I'm actually, you know what, I might actually, if it does it again, I think I'm going to end it and then try to go back on, but hopefully it doesn't do it again. To me, it's saying it's fine now. Technology, my goodness. It's still buffering. Just for the recording, we're having some Instagram issues, so I will be back in a moment. So let's see if this is working any better. Hi folks. We're having some connectivity issues. Hopefully it's working now. We're good, Coach? Okay, good. Just a little glitch, I guess. So I was going to show you a not so great flashcard and see if you can figure out why it is not so great. So I will first show the screen here, my other camera. So we have, it says, how much does an elephant weigh? And then on the back, we have African bush elephant, weighs 6,000 kilograms. Whoops, I forgot a zero. That might be one reason. It's not a good flashcard. 6,000 kilograms. And then we have Asian elephant, 5,400 kilograms. So that would be the front question, and that would be the back. And I'll show Instagram here. So it's going to be backwards for the Instagram folks. But how much does an elephant weigh? And then we have 2 pieces of information on the back. African bush elephant weighing 6,000 kilograms and an Asian elephant weighing 5,400 kilograms. So I'm wondering if anyone, not to put you on the spot, but if anyone can tell why maybe that isn't the best way to frame a flashcard. The reason that's not a great way is because, so you're asking one question, and when you're wanting to make your flashcards, you're going to want to only have one piece of information on each flashcard. So even if you are going to be answering the same question, you will want to be only having one piece of information on the back. So in terms of this, if you want to specifically, the way you would want to phrase this is how much does an African bush elephant weigh? And then on the back put 6,000 kilograms. And then you would want to say how much does an Asian elephant weigh and put 5,400 kilograms. And this is because your brain will be tricked, because you will only be able to recall a certain amount of information, and you'll be confused in terms of which elephant you're talking about. So you're more likely to make a mistake if you include more than one piece of information on the flashcard at a time, if that makes sense. I'm just going to go back to my notes here. So, in terms of, I'm going to go back to the mnemonic device issue. In terms of making your flashcards appropriate, I'll use my cards as an example. You're going to want to include both pictures as well as words. So I am studying to be a yoga teacher, so I have downward dog on one of my flashcards. As you can see, my pictures are not very good, but they get the point across, and I'm going to know what that means. So then on the back, I wanted to know the Sanskrit name for downward dog. And as you can see, it's definitely not in point form, but it is in, I have the word written out there, Adho Mukha Savasana. And then I have some funny pictures drawn beside it. So I have 2 + 2, which is add in English, and ho for Santa. Then I have Mukha and Savasana. So these are all pictures that will help me to recall that Sanskrit word. And then I also have a second one for downward dog, because this is a separate piece of information that I want to recall about downward dog. And what I've put on the back is that downward dog lengthens the spine. So I've drawn a little picture of a person with a spine and some arrows going downwards. So to me, that will imply that downward dog lengthens the spine. So I have both the Sanskrit meaning, or the Sanskrit pronunciation and word for downward dog, as well as one of the benefits of the downward dog posture. So then a second example is child pose is another posture in yoga that I want to remember. And the Sanskrit name for this is balasana. So I want to remember balasana, and so I've put a picture of a ball, I've put a picture of a little girl, and I've named her Anna, and hopefully that will help me. Actually, I think that's already helped me remember that word, because that was one that I was not familiar with. So I have child pose now as balasana, and that is something that I will be able to recall in my mind because I've drawn these funny pictures, and and I've colored them very brightly, and that will help me with my recall when I'm trying to figure out remember these names. Hi l'atelier lumière. Welcome. We're just talking about how to create effective flashcards. So then I have another example of a flashcard with child pose. So I wanted to do the same thing as I did with downward dog. So child pose, I already know that the Sanskrit name is balasana, but I wanted to know what it is used for. So I wrote here that child pose is a resting pose. So I have a picture of a guy with Z's as if he is sleeping, and he's yawning, he's going ah. So as you can see, my drawing skills are not immaculate, but they do the trick because I will remember. Well, I already knew this, so that's kind of cheating, but that will help me to remember what child pose is. So that's an example of my flashcards that I've made for my yoga study. And as you can see, I've only put one piece of information on each flashcard, as I do not want to be confused when I am attempting to recall. So that is a really important tip to bear in mind when you are creating your own flashcards. And also make sure that you're using funny pictures. As you can see, I kind of constructed a few different images there, and that will help me to remember those words because they are not too familiar to me. So it will help for me to recall them because they are not in my primary language. So by making individual cards for each piece of information, you're going to guarantee that you have the correct information when you're attempting to recall. So that's really important. So then you're going to want to, when you have complex steps, and this is a very basic example, but if you have a complex formula or complex question or complex steps, you're going to want to make sure you break it down into simpler questions, and that is also going to help you with recall. You don't want to be overwhelming yourself with really complex information on top of your studying. So you want to make sure that your flashcards are really easy to use and really accessible. So make sure that you're breaking things down into a variety of different steps, similar to what I've done with my flashcards. So for example, with downward dog, I will also want to go into the various other benefits that downward dog has because it has more than just lengthening the spine. So it's really important that I remember those as well. So I will make a flashcard for each of those concepts as well. And then I might even make some flashcards around how to maintain the posture properly and what it should look like. So I'll make sure to break that down appropriately so that I will be able to bring it back when I'm hopefully teaching someday. So I wanted to just end on a note of giving you a couple of tips for the best ways to use your flashcards. So once you've had your flashcards all made, it's really important to know how to use them properly. So one of the tips that you can use is to say your answers out loud when you're studying, because not only are you getting the visual impression, you're also hearing it. So that's a really important aspect of studying, is to say things out loud, because when we say things out loud, we're more apt to recall it because we're getting two inputs of information, visually and audibly. A second tip is to make sure you are studying both sides of the card. So make sure that you're looking at one side of your card and then the other side of the card, so that you really have a grasp of both sides of the information. As I mentioned before, flashcards are not the only way to study. They're just one method of study which can be combined with lots of other ways. So think of them as a tool in your toolbox. They're a really great tool, but they're not the be-all and the end-all. There are lots of other ways to study as well. So make sure that you're researching and incorporating some other ways of studying as well. One of the key components to flashcards is to learn the information first. So for me, when I am going to be studying about yoga, I'm going to be looking at some books that I can read around yoga practice. I'm going to be doing yoga practice on a regular basis, so I become familiar with the terms and the poses. So I'm already familiar with the information prior to doing my studying. The flashcards is just a way to reinforce the information in your brain and help with recall and strengthening that recall muscle in the brain. So I hope that was helpful. I know we've been having some connectivity issues with Instagram, and I'm so sorry about that. We were on, I don't know, I don't really know. Oh, whoops. Flipped it around and you can see. Yeah, I don't really know what happened, so I'm so sorry about that. But that is all the content I have for now. Definitely encourage you to check out Anki if you're someone who is more digitally oriented. But if you're someone who likes to have hard content to work with, then definitely try to make your own flashcards. You can buy a deck of flashcards just at the dollar store or anywhere like Staples or an office supply store as well. Flashcards are your friend. They are a great way to study and retain information. So that's all the information I had for this week. I really hope that was helpful. I look forward to incorporating flashcards into my life and into my studying. It's not something that I used to use when I was in my undergrad, but I wish I had. So I'm really excited to be able to incorporate that into my life, and I hope you are too. So that's it for this week. I hope this was a benefit to you, and if you want to gain access to any of our content from Homework Help Global, please visit us on Facebook and on YouTube. We are also on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, as you can see, Google+. We do some blogging on Medium. And now we put these podcasts on SoundCloud, Anchor, iTunes, Apple Podcast, and Google Play Music. All you have to do to find us is to search Homework Help Global on any of those platforms, and we will show up. So we are on all of those platforms, and you can find us no problem. So if you're looking to access any of this content, or also if you're looking to acquire any of the services that Homework Help Global offers, certainly look us up on any of those platforms and we will be glad to speak with you. So I hope you guys all have a really nice week and a nice weekend, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.